Hello, everyone. That's perfect. I think we are online, and looks like we've got a nice group of people out there right now. And today, everyone, we have the pleasure of learning about how SABER was used in Arizona's National Mass Care exercise. And we have Whitney Hensiak and Steve Sheve, who are going to make presentations in a minute. But wanted to welcome everybody to the session today and remind you that while we'll open the mics at the end to ask questions on your little panel there for this GoToWebinar, there is a questions panel, and you can ask any questions there, and I'll moderate the questions and get them to our presenters today. So if we go to the next slide, we'll take a look at what we're going to be doing today. I'll give a little bit of an introduction since we do have some fair number of people who are names that at least I don't recognize who are new to SABER. So I'll give a very brief introduction to SABER. And then Whitney will take a look at the mass care exercise and how she, as the voluntary agency and private sector liaison, ran the business part of the exercise. And then Eric will take a look at how he moved SABER information into a very, very nice ArcGIS tool set. Eric as the senior GIS analyst. And if we go to the next slide, we'll kick this off. First of all, SABER. The overall role of SABER is to influence priorities, to make certain that business gets back in business as quickly as possible. SABER was created by the private sector, and the whole goal was to have a single place where business could put their business status information and their restoration needs as well. That would then be shared to authorized government agencies and other organizations that could get the information from a single place. And all this emerged in discussions with the state of Florida and Walgreens that became part of the key group of our organizing committee. And Florida said, when I need to know business status, I have to call 50 different companies. And Walgreens said, when there's a big hurricane coming up the coast, I get asked from 150 different governments what businesses are operating. Can't we do something about that? So they came to me running the XchangeCore open source community. XchangeCore is an information sharing software that's developed by the Department of Homeland Security or developed for the Department of Homeland Security. And I happened to have led the team that did that, so they were talking to me about how we could use technology. And we put together a prototype in 2014 and actually named by the then head of Walgreens Emergency Management. SABER was created and operates as a nonprofit for the benefit of business to make their lives easier and governments to make their information more authoritative and their lives easier. And as we've evolved over the last years, the purpose of SABER has refined as well, because the purpose is to influence government and business-to-business recovery priorities. So it's not just relying on government. Business to business can make things work better. We do that by providing accurate and timely business status information. What's happening out there and what do businesses need to get reopened? For the whole purpose of getting businesses back in business faster. So next slide, please. So how SABER works. Let's go on to the next one. And there are three different ways that businesses get information into SABER. The first way is a fully automated connection. So nobody has to think about it anytime. Currently, I have discussions going on with a couple of companies, but only one, Walmart, is providing this information in a fully electronic fashion. So if there is a Walmart that had a pipe break in Lincoln, Nebraska today, SABER knows that, and you can see that on the SABER status map. So constantly available there. But that's on the input side. On the output side, on the next slide, we see that you've got all the different types of applications that are currently in use by organizations, whether government or corporate or public website, whether it's a web EOC, a cloud EOC, spot-on response, other applications, whether it's a GIS like ArcGIS and the Common Operating Picture, or GeoCollaborate, or any of those other things, mobile apps, and even a free copy of Google Earth, which is always my favorite because people can get SABER information at no cost, and on a phone call we can have you operating in Google Earth, seeing the SABER information in 90 seconds. So the whole goal of SABER is to use the applications that are available in different organizations at the present time so that nobody has to do anything special. Because SABER, it says right in the center there, SABER is status data. Not a place to look at it or visualize it, nothing that anybody has to go out and get at that will compete with some application you already have. It goes right into those applications. As the next slide shows, it goes in a second way, and that is a simple spreadsheet. Because when we started talking to companies, we learned that even the biggest companies, Walgreens, Costco, and all the rest, when they report up to their CEO the status of their businesses, they send that person a spreadsheet. So we said, all right, if we can make the company do as little as possible, take that spreadsheet, the same one they use internally, and put it over to SABER. SABER grabs that data, processes it into national standard formats, and then on the next slide, same thing, that same information goes out to all the other organizations in the applications that they're using. So the vast majority of people use the spreadsheets. The next slide shows that there's a third way, though. SABER is teamed with a company, Spot-on Response, that does mobile apps to develop a mobile app for the application and the delivery of business status information into SABER. That information comes into SABER in the same way as the other two ways, gets transformed into national standard formats. On the next slide, we'll see the same thing again. It goes out to all those different applications. So no matter where you're doing, on the next slide, you'll see that whether it's the option one, fully automated way, a spreadsheet of status, the mobile app that SABER provides, you're able to get that information transformed into a national standard format and provided into the receiving information, so in their own applications. So that's a brief overview of SABER, and if we go on to the next slide, we're going to see that we have all these different ways, and if you go to the SABER website, there are videos. Target did the video on how they use the spreadsheet. There's a video in there on how to do the mobile app component of it. So lots of ways for you to learn more about it after this very brief introduction. And now let's get started with the meat of the show today. On the next slide, we're going to introduce our featured presentations, Arizona's National Mass Care Exercise, and then follow that using SABER data in ArcGIS, and we're going to be fortunate enough to get a demonstration of that actual application. So with that, let me turn it over to Whitney, and it's all yours. We are very interested in hearing how you made use of this information.
Thank you, Jim. Good morning for some of you morning, and good afternoon for some of you in the afternoon. It's morning here in Arizona. So thank you for having us and inviting us to share the good word about what we've been up to in Arizona. Again, I'm going to talk about our National Mass Care Exercise. For some of you who don't know, who are on this call, each year FEMA taps a state to host this national level exercise, but it's mass care response oriented, different than the NLE that many of you have probably heard about. Last year Utah hosted it, Missouri's hosted it, Florida's hosted it, Texas has hosted it. We were tapped to host it this year. I do believe, don't quote me on this, I think Illinois is hosting it next year. I'm not positive on that. So we were tapped to host this. Next slide, please. And I want to give you, before I dive into that exercise and what that looks like, I want to give you a little bit of just background on who we are. For those of you, as I know most of you, you're all nationwide. So the Arizona Department of Emergency and Military Affairs is a state department here in Arizona, and our mission is to provide military and emergency management capabilities to citizens of Arizona and the nation. Just to break that down for you, we have 3 main divisions in our department. It's actually the National Guard here in Arizona, so we are the Army Guard, the Air Guard, and Emergency Management. We do all report to a 2-star Adjutant General who then reports up to Governor Doug Ducey here in Arizona. So that kind of gives you that breakdown of who we are and where we're domiciled. In Arizona, I know other emergency management departments nationwide at the state level are housed in other areas as well. Not everybody is laid out the same. And so, of course, we bring our emergency management capabilities to Arizona and obviously nationwide and to the world, depending on where our Guard soldiers and airmen are deploying. Next slide, please. This is near and dear to our hearts, and I'm sure some of you, many of you, have probably heard the term, the concept, or the movement of the whole community. We like to show this slide everywhere we go to keep reinforcing that concept and knowing, and SABER is a perfect example of this, where anybody can fall on this tree in any point in time in our different phases of what we do in emergency management. Not one entity can do it alone, so we always like to show this because it provides a great visual as to who's really a part of all of this. And as we dive into the exercise, you'll start to see, wow, it's not just one leaf on that tree. So we really incorporate the concept of the whole community in everything we do here in Arizona, as well as I'm sure many of your other states too. Next slide. Here we are, Arizona, please host the National Mass Care Exercise. And all the other states that have been tapped to host this, like a Texas or a Florida, you know, it's not difficult for them to come up with a catastrophic scenario. Here in Arizona, we're lucky. We have our we're a slightly small disaster state. We do have our fair share of disasters and events, but thankfully, knock on wood, not to some of that catastrophic level, especially like we saw last year across the country. So we were told for something to be as large to warrant a national mass care exercise, it's got to be something big. So here's what we came up with, which is actually probably the most plausible catastrophic event that could happen here for us in Arizona. We're looking at a scenario of a catastrophic seismic event in Southern California. And what's going to happen with that? They can only go in one direction if they evacuate, and that's east. So they're coming here, and we figured we'd exercise about 400,000 plus self-evacuees into Arizona out of California. What do we do? That's not destruction in Arizona, but by gosh, it's disruption. Life goes on here. And now we've got all these other folks coming in, and we exercised it in real time the week of 21 to 24 May. So you're looking at 3 triple-digit temperatures for people coming across the desert from California into Arizona, probably with only a half a tank of gas. So you can start to, I'm sure all your wheels are starting to turn and thinking about, wow, what's that going to look like? So you can see that since we don't have that direct damage, but other things are going to start to be impacted. Transportation commodities, how are things going to get moved around? Utilities, supply chain. Are the hotels booked already? Aren't they? Where is Red Cross going to stand up shelters? How are we going to get water to people who break down in the middle of Interstate 10 where there's nowhere but desert and they don't have any water? So we had to start to look at all of these different issues, and not just because we don't have anything, just any destruction, in our state. Next slide, please. This is always a good visual, and every time we had a planning meeting for this exercise, which by the way, we planned for about nearly a year to host this. So we are always reminding ourselves, how are they going to get here? Well, these are their options. Way out west, for those of you who are from the on the East Coast right now, I'm actually from the East Coast, so you have a lot more roads. we are pretty limited out here in the Wild West, where things are pretty spread out and very rural when you start to look at a state like Arizona. And for those of you on the East Coast, Coconino County in Arizona is larger than the state of New Jersey. We have a lot of land mass here, and it's very rural. So it just kind of paints that picture for you about how large we're really talking about, and you can see sparingly what our interstate system looks out here. So they have 3 options. They have 40, they have 10, and they have 8. And there aren't many places to stop in between when you're on those roads, if anyone has ever driven on any of those. And just to let you know, as a side note, this exercise also included Nevada Emergency Management and New Mexico Emergency Management. Both of those states also played along as well, because there is a factor of Interstate 15 that you can see that goes up into Las Vegas, into Clark County. And then also Interstate 10 will continue on into New Mexico, as well as Interstate 40. So both of those states also wanted to get in on the action, if you will, to kind of talk about what some of these issues might derive from this mass migration. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to drill down even further. I thought I'd wait on my own personal introduction until we got to this. As you saw from one of the previous slides, I do serve as DEMA's voluntary agency liaison and private sector liaison. That's not unheard of that both of those positions are one person in many states. We tend to look at things that we like to marry the two together and start making those introductions. There's no reason why Walmart shouldn't know who Red Cross is or anything like that. So that's part of my role here at DEMA. So what I chose to exercise is, you've heard the term Business Emergency Operations Center. That's the typical term. Here in Arizona in the Wild West, we tend to like to be different. So we are the Business Emergency Coordination Center. We actually see ourselves as more of a coordinating entity versus an operations entity when it comes to the private sector. They're going to do what they need to do. I'm here to just help coordinate them. So our BECC, yes, while I can probably gather a lot of them together in person, actually we prefer to do things virtually. If we know businesses aren't impacted, we know that they want to be on home base. Not to mention, most of my big corporate, big box store contacts are elsewhere in the country, whether it's Rick at Lowe's in North Carolina, or Rachel at Walmart in Arkansas, or John at Target in Minnesota. So you start to see that that really comes together virtually. Now I have to go ahead and give props to Rachel at Walmart. When I was talking to her long ago, months ago, in early planning for this exercise to bring them into the fold, she actually mentioned SABER to me. I had not heard of it. So it was Rachel creating that introduction to the world of SABER for me and gave me the right contacts, went to the website, found Jim's name and number, and contacted him, and from there moved forward. And then brought Eric in, our GIS analyst, and Dave Roby, who's in the room as well. Dave is our WebEOC administrator. So we're always thinking, who else should know this information? Who should be involved? And these two guys are my core here at DEMA to help me move that forward and make SABER, the use of SABER, all it could possibly be. So I activated the BECC, and all through the planning process, what I've discovered with the private sector is inclusion, inclusion, inclusion. I have included them in the early stages of planning. I had a private sector and a voluntary agency working group to help plan the exercise. I didn't just want to bring them in and tell them on May 20th, by the way, we're having this tomorrow, do you want to be involved? They've known about it for months, and I brought them in on all the planning, and I've included them on if they wanted to even be empowered and write their own injects. How do they want this to look? And many of them operate in WebEOC, many of them don't. I provided a WebEOC training here on base, on our military base, or by the way, we're housed on the National Guard base in Arizona. So Dave, here in the room, helped and instructed a WebEOC training either online for them or in person. So all part of that planning process for that exercise to get them ready to roll on what they could do and what they could learn from it. So activated our BECC virtually through WebEOC, email, and phone. We used all methods. Not everybody chose to be in WebEOC, so I did daily emails, and they always had the Our daily briefings occurred twice a day in the state EOC, so they always had the call-in information and they would call in. I also had daily conference calls for a battle rhythm for the BECC, so whoever was activated or playing that day, they knew at 10 a.m. that morning, and Jim from SABER sat in on one of those. They knew that they could call in, and then they're all going to tell each other and me who's doing what does this look like for them, what would be a concern of theirs at that time for the exercise. So you can see from this list here, this is just a snippet of who is involved along the way, whether it was in planning or in play. Obviously, CVS, Walgreens. For obvious reasons, people coming across from California probably left their house without much. We try to prepare people as much as possible and educate them, but we know they're going to forget things like prescriptions and things like that. So CVS and Walgreens played a big role, not only with us here in our BECC, but also with our Arizona Department of Health Services with ESF 8 and their Health Emergency Operations Center, which was activated too. So Walgreens and CVS were really going in both directions and pulling it all together for themselves as to what they need to do for their next steps. And I also pulled in our Arizona water wastewater sector, AZ WARN. Some of you in other states probably have a WARN. Not all states do, but most do. That's the Water Wastewater Agency Response Network. So we had representatives from our AZ WARN playing along in our Business Emergency Coordination Center. The financial sector. We have an Arizona FIRST here. Some of you other states have a FIRST organization. That's your financial sector industry association for the financial business continuity planner. So our Arizona FIRST Association had representatives involved in this. And what's interesting and one of their biggest concerns and what this scenario would play out was actual security for cash movement, those trucks. And if people get, you know how people get in disasters, some people might get a little crazy and they might be going after some things. So they were concerned about cash movement security. And another thing I actually learned too during the process is some of the retailers who may be moving commodities would need unmarked semi-trucks. Because if they're marked trucks, we learned that that might be a security issue as well. And then Cisco played connectivity. What's the first thing people care about when they enter a shelter? They're not looking for food. You all know that. They're looking for, what's the Wi-Fi here? It's a really big deal. It's a fact of life. Cisco has the ability to bring connectivity to shelters and things like that, as well as a CenturyLink, Verizon, of course, with Cellular on Wheels, all of those organizations. So they were playing along and calling into our conference calls. Boeing. We have a Boeing plant here where the Apache attack helicopters are made, or right here in Mesa, just outside of Phoenix. And so our Boeing counterparts wanted to play along and just to have an understanding of what this looks like, because they have locations in California who very well may be impacted by the earthquake itself, and then have to figure out what do we do with those employees. Well, we need to bring them over to the Arizona plant and location here. So they had a vested interest in what this might look like. Kinder Morgan. Kinder Morgan, the owner of the fuel pipeline, the only one between California and Arizona, which, by the way, in the scenario may have been broken, if you will. Probably a little bit of destruction to that fuel line creates an interesting level of play for us. So Kinder Morgan was a big part of the exercise for the entire 4 days, and really looking at what does that bring with our fuel issues? How can we get that back online? You've got people stranded. So very, very core piece to this. The Arizona Hotel and Resort Security Association, another industry association that I brought into this. All of our hotels and resort, hospitality is a big industry here in Arizona, and they really need to consider what are we looking at as far as vacancies? Where can people go? How can we get them there? And they're already booking rooms as they're driving over here. And so they really have to start thinking ahead and how is this going to look for them and how to plan. So it's interesting for them to be able to jump on some of these calls and to listen in on the briefings in the EOC too. Finally, another two players in this. Like I said, Walmart did introduce me to SABER, and SABER was part of our process. And Walmart did send over that spreadsheet. And so that kind of got us underway, really looking at how can we use SABER, because honestly, if you've got a mass migration coming over, what are going to be some of their first stops besides maybe a hotel? Probably a Walmart, a Target, a Walgreens, a CVS. People probably don't have much with them, so we had to consider where are they going to go. Next slide, please. And we have to be able to show them where they can go. How can we take that information, embed that into SABER, figure out who's got what Walmart's got what stores got what, where are they open, where are they closed, how can we communicate this out to the public? So we decided, let's take a look at SABER in this exercise and see what we can do and how we can run with it. So I'm going to now turn it over to Eric, our GIS analyst here at DEMA, to talk about how he added on to that and built on to that. Thank you very much.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at in the States. So I was approached by Whitney for this exercise probably about, a month prior to the exercise, just seeing if I would sit in with the call about SABER and seeing what Jim could offer as far as data, essentially, for commodity disruptions, because I didn't have an understanding of SABER. I didn't really know about it prior to the exercise and talking with Jim. So I was approached by Whitney basically to see if we could create a snapshot essentially that shows a geospatial visual of where the disruptions are occurring across the state. And with that, Dave, go next slide. So with that, in ArcGIS Online, one of the things that we really are invested here at Arizona Emergency Management is web mapping. Web mapping essentially creates basically live dynamic data, so you can visualize it real time, because traditionally when you're working incidents and you see map products or visuals, etc., that are printed on paper PDF products, essentially they're out of date basically by the time you receive it for a briefing. So we were basically going down the road of creating a web application that worked with SABER to show the visuals of where everything was located at, where essentially the big box stores were experiencing disruptions. So ArcGIS Online, ESRI, they released an extension within ArcGIS Online called Operations Dashboard at the end of December of last year, and essentially it creates an application theme that creates essentially a common operating picture, because during an EOC display or EOC activation, you like to visualize multiple things on one screen essentially. So a map, metrics, gauges, etc. And the dashboard theme that you see here on the presentation basically creates a visual to show that that information real time, live, and dynamic. So that's kind of the approach we went with this. So within SABER, we created a process basically to consume data from SABER and visualize it and put it on a map. So Dave, you go next. So one of the documentations that SABER had online, it referenced some FEMA programming basically that showed basically how to extract data from SABER in their format and create it into a GIS friendly format. I played around with a couple of the scripts and reached out to actually the person that originated it from FEMA, and just basically kind of got some mixed results, I guess, on the output. So decided surface the web, see what I could come up with, and what I found, Robbie Bagby with Georgia Emergency Management, I believe he's on the call right now, he created a similar process of basically consuming data in a different format and visualizing it on a web map, web-based application. So I basically reached out to him and saw what are you using, what process are you using within your code to create this application essentially to show data on a map. So we created a Python script that you see here. There's an example of it through Jupyter Notebook. The script was created. Once the script's created, you can download it, put it on your desktop, and essentially create a Windows schedule cast. So If you wanted to specify every hour, run this task to go to SABER and grab the data and visualize it and put it on a map, you could specify that. So ultimately, it's whatever you wanted to do. That's kind of the process we went. So I can show you an example of the actual application in itself. Actually, I have it open here. Here's the application. So it's within ArcGIS Online. It's a story map theme that basically creates a common operating picture for each, essentially each function within the emergency management. So another thing we were tasked with or challenged with is how do we separate web applications from logistics versus public health versus weather, because they may not necessarily tie themselves together in the capacity, and we don't want to create a busy map that shows a bunch of information. So we created this tab theme here that basically goes left to right and just shows that you have operations involved, logistics, mass care, public health, private organizations, etc. So just going from left to right, I'll just show you right here real quick. Kind of just paints the scenario so new users can log in and see what situation they're currently dealing with, or what basically is causing an EOC evacuation, and you can see the numbers that reference the earthquake. So continuing, going across, EOC status, you can see what's open, what's closed. So we can go over to the actual SABER piece. So here's the information here. As you can see, it's in a dashboard theme. Essentially, it's showing what is closed, what's showing disruptions, and you can visualize it on a map. So on this list here, this information here, you can actually drill down in the information. So if you click this Sedona CVS close, it'll zoom to the location, and click this icon, and let's see. You can basically see what information is pertaining to it. Additionally, you can set filters here, specifying what city do you want to see showing disruptions, etc., or what stores are showing disruptions, and then it gives you kind of that quick snapshot at the bottom. So if you're walking into a new EOC, or you're assigned a new role and you're working in the private organization role and you want to see what's the current situation, what's the current sit rep, essentially, you can just look at these numbers here, and that'll kind of tie things together to show you what the disruption is. And as I said, the data is dynamic real time. So it was a pretty huge success here at DEMA using this application. I would say one of the shortfalls or one of the challenges was getting people familiar and comfortable with using this. Basically, people, you gotta practice if you want to try and get an understanding of this. So there were still a lot of people not using it to its full extent, but overall, having this visual up on an EOC wall, it was great just for looking at really quick to have that at-a-glance situational awareness. All right, there we go. The whack one, Dave. So that's kind of just the theme. Additional takeaways, I guess I would like to see going forward, having information that pertains to gas stations. I think Whitney and I both talked about having a visual to show where are you seeing gas station fuel distribution, what's experiencing outages, what's experiencing trouble. So I mean, there's a lot of things we wish we would have touched on, but I think for the exercise purposes, we had some successes overall.
I'll agree with Eric. I'll get closer to this. I'll agree. I think that this was our first time incorporating SABER into anything that we do. So, and I realize that we are probably just scratching the surface of what the capabilities are, but this was a great first go at it, a learning experience for us, but clearly a useful tool. And we're hoping to, over time, learn more, grow more with what it can do, and just go go forward from there. Any thoughts, Jim?
Well, first of all, two great presentations. You really distilled a lot of information in an excellent way, and I'm sure everybody appreciated that. So I certainly got having woven in and out of you two and your experiences over the months. This is a great summary for me. I really appreciate it. The one thing that I would add is that when you talk about gas stations, the opportunity for a state to organize their state-level gas station association, whatever that might be, or association of convenience stores, and get them involved to put the information into SABER in any one of the three ways that is there, is really the next step in SABER. We have the resources to continue to reach out to national footprint stores and provide that, so that takes the burden off of a state. But a state BEOC or BECC really has the opportunity to reach down into those more local regional organizations and help them become part of SABER and bring that information in. And that can be done in a couple of different ways. Just as you saw, a gas station association or a big gas station provider could enroll in SABER, provide a spreadsheet, or provide a directly automated link, or use the mobile app at all their gas stations, and be able to deliver that information to SABER to the benefit of Arizona in this case. Or what Maryland has done is to take all those non-national footprint stores that are members of the BEOC, and where they are now either calling into a BEOC, or in some states using a web EOC, or South Carolina the cloud EOC, and whatever application they're currently using, to be able to gather that information from the local business and provide that either as a spreadsheet or, again, an automated feed into SABER. So the EOC, BECC becomes the coordinator of taking the valuable information that you get from local businesses and making it systematically available to SABER, which then feeds it back into your GIS or other application and gives you that information in a more systematic way than receiving a bunch of telephone calls or however it's being done. So that's an evolving way that the state organization can sort of become an intermediary to systematize collection of their local state information and yet get it into SABER, which makes it available for other states, businesses, as well as back into Eric, for example, as part of his GIS. So that would be the one addition to your plan, and certainly something that you may want to think about in the future.
Thank you, and I'll agree. I think that our entire industry, and you hit that spot on, is ever evolving. It's a constant changing and a constant inclusion of a new partner, and so our work is really never done. So we're looking forward to seeing where this thing can go.
Yep, and with partners like you, SABER can grow. So tremendously appreciate your comments and questions, anyone. I'm looking, Elizabeth Johnson. Let me turn your microphone on, and you should now be able to talk.
Hi, so I was curious if we can get a set of those slides. I'm actually from FEMA Region 5 area, and I'm a liaison officer in the Air National Guard, partly dealing with ESF 8 and also ESF 6. So I'm curious how much this could be used, and talk to some leadership for some of the exercises we have coming up with the new Maverick seismic zone. So some national level exercises coming up with at least 8 states involved. So that's why I'm curious on the slides, so I can kind of digest a little bit more.
Oh, certainly. And you know what? My email is up there, Elizabeth. If you want to drop me an email, I'd be happy to also connect you to our exercise branch staff as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
If you want to know even more about what this whole giant monster was all about, I was just one small piece. I'd be happy to get you the slides,
Yes.
and also connect you to other folks on our team.
Okay, great. Yeah, I already took a snapshot of the slide with my phone too, so of your contact information.
Perfect. Just drop me a note and we'll get you what you need.
All right, and
Perfect,
Elizabeth, yeah, Elizabeth, the entire session has been recorded and is usually up on the SABER YouTube channel within 2 or 3 days, and then we publish that in the next newsletter where you can get that. So if you want to hear exactly what Whitney and Eric have said, that'll be there and available for you.
Perfect. Thank you.
And actually, you mentioned you know, the next NLA. SABER was very active in the past one, and one of the last webinars we had summarized directly from NLA 18 what SABER was doing, and that webinar happens to be recorded and up there if you want to see how SABER operates in an NLE. And we got one more here from Casey Chartrand. Your phone should be open.
Great, thanks, Jim. This is a fantastic presentation. Thank you guys so much for sharing this. It's just so interesting to see how all the pieces came together. I apologize if I missed it, but I didn't hear the duration of the exercise and how frequently you were updating the business status during the exercise. You know, was this going on hourly, or did you just do it a couple of times? Because it seems like it's that iterative process that makes SABER especially useful.
We can both answer that. First of all, the duration of the exercise was 21 to 24 May. It was 3.5 days. It was all day Monday, all day Tuesday, all day Wednesday, and then a half day on Thursday, rolling into after action in the afternoon on Thursday. We had 2 Business Emergency Coordination Center Battle Rhythm conference calls. Not all the businesses chose to play the whole time. We opened it up to them in their concepts and objectives forms to submit when they were available to play and when they could play. Some only played 1 day, some were consistent throughout. And as far as the posting with ArcGIS and the dashboard, I'll let Eric answer that.
So yeah, I had the script run once a day, and then essentially, you know, I think Jim was saying 6 hours was about the time frame of when SABER pushed out information. I may be wrong on that. So essentially it wasn't on an hourly basis by all means. It was more of a daily, once a day type thing.
Great. Well, thank you. I guess in the long run, all of us are always interested in, you know, return on investment and how do you justify the effort. So I guess as we do more of these exercises, it'll be great to see how we answer the question, you know, what would it take to do this if you were going through the piecemeal approach that people had to do before SABER was serving as sort of the common platform? Because I think for a lot of us, if you want to tell people that this is a direction you want to go, the more you can quantify it, the better.
Thank you, certainly.
All right, and actually let me just respond to that question also from the technology side. SABER publishes the information as soon as someone provides it. So it's going up there instantly. There are 2 different sources of information on SABER. One of them is more open, the other one requires a username and password. The one that's more open updates every 2 hours. The one that is username and password protected, and you get to do lots of other queries associated with that. That one, every time you run your query, you're getting the most current information. And so it goes anywhere from instantaneous to every couple of hours for the information availability. When we get that information is whenever the company gives it to us. That automated feed, Walmart, that's happening every 4 minutes, I think it is. Others are going to update whenever they update their executives, and that usually is a morning, afternoon, every 6 hours, as Eric said. So the information comes in at various times. The technology pushes it through immediately. The providers of the information are really the ones who determine the pace and flow of updating that information. Well, I want to thank, if we have no more questions popping up here, want to thank Eric and Whitney for working with us over the last 6 weeks or so. It's been a pleasure. Excellent presentations, and I think you've really motivated some other folks to think about how they can use the SABER tool set as well. And just beautiful work on the part of both of you. So I appreciate that very much and appreciate you joining us today and sharing that time.
Thank you for having us.
To everyone,
Thank you, Jim.
to everyone, thank our presenters, and we will be convening next month, and we'll actually have the state of Virginia speaking about their participation in the national level exercise and the SABER data that was associated with that. So another good real-life presentation. Hope all of you have an excellent next month. Enjoy the 4th of July, and regards to everyone. Thank you, Eric and Whitney.
Yeah.
Bye now.